interstate pipelines, hydraulic fracturing, clean coal systems, photovoltaic cells, nuclear reactors, America's energy power and technology. But in 1789, it all came down to the power of a horse to move a wagon load. Horsepower, the initial measurement used to compare the capabilities of a steam engine to the capabilities of a horse. To be precise, 33,000 pounds moved 1 foot in 1 minute. Today, we have additional terms: BTUs, barrels per day, megawatt hours. Like other policy areas we now wrestle with today, the Founding Fathers were masterful in crafting a constitutional framework which provided for the future without actually knowing what it would be or what they should call it or what technologies might be invented. As we all know, the Constitution set up a system of checks and balances. And within those checks and balances, it is Congress's job to pass laws and to oversee their implementation. It does so on a co-equal basis with the other two branches, the executive and the judiciary. One of the great things about Congress is that it is the most representative and the most directly accountable branch of government. A wrong vote has consequences come November. This self-regulating mechanism we call elections helps to ensure that Congress and the federal government strikes the appropriate balance when establishing national policies. Since the passage of the Clean Air Act, Congress has played a central role in crafting well-balanced policies that protect America's air, water, and land. Just to mention a few, the Clean Water Act, the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, Superfund. The nation has grown cleaner. But today, when it comes to energy policy, Congress's contributions are blocked. The administration is taking unilateral executive action and ignoring Congress's role. In 2013, President Obama declared in his State of the Union address, "If Congress won't act on his preferred environmental policies, I will." President Obama's liberal use of the veto, executive agencies stretching the bounds of statutory interpretation, State Department's slow walking of infrastructure permit decisions, EPA's power grabs. The results are clear and disappointing. Keystone XL pipeline. The State Department said it would be the safest and most environmentally responsible form of crude oil transportation, resulting in 28 to 42% fewer greenhouse gas emissions than alternative forms of transportation. The Senate approved it by a bipartisan vote of 62 to 36, including 9 Democrats. The House passed it too. President Obama vetoed it and recently rejected it again. Waters of the U.S. rule. A bipartisan group of 69 senators believe the EPA's new rule is not well-balanced environmental policy and needs to be rewritten. 57 of those senators voted for common sense legislation introduced by Senator John Barrasso to require EPA to revise the rule. 11 of those senators voted to filibuster that bill, then turned around and wrote a letter to EPA complaining about the rule and asking the agency to rewrite it. President Obama threatened to veto the bill, ignoring everyone's concerns, and unilaterally preserved the flawed rule. Coal-fired power plant rule. The rule violates federal law and will raise energy prices, threaten electric reliability, eliminate jobs, and destroy economic growth, all for little environmental benefit. Even Professor Lawrence Tribe, who taught both President Obama and Chief Justice Roberts at Harvard Law, said that this executive action was the equivalent of, quote, burning the Constitution. The Senate will vote on bipartisan resolutions of disapproval to block the rule as early as this week. President Obama is expected to veto them. In addition to blocking Congress's bipartisan actions, President Obama has aggressively pursued executive actions to wage a war on fossil fuels and natural resources development in other ways. In 2011, he retroactively vetoed a permit for a coal mining project in West Virginia that had been approved 4 years earlier. In 2014, he preemptively vetoed a permit for a copper and gold mining project in Alaska before mine developers even submitted an application. In fiscal year 2015, he leased a mere 2.8% of onshore and offshore federal lands for energy production. He has slow-walked permits for liquefied natural gas export facilities. He has utilized his designation authorities under the National Wilderness Preservation System, the National Wild and Scenic River System, the Antiquities Act, the Endangered Species Act, and other programs and laws to block energy production on federal lands. His administration currently brags about its attempts to circumvent Congress during international climate negotiations in Paris next month. Congress is joined by other governmental bodies in protesting the executive branch's overreach. 27 states with whom the federal government is supposed to enter into cooperative federalism have filed lawsuits against the Obama administration's coal-fired power plant rule. Over 30 states have filed suit against its Waters of the U.S. rule. The judicial branch appears concerned about the legality of the Obama administration's executive actions also. In 2014, the Supreme Court warned in Utility Air Group v. EPA that the EPA must not exceed its statutory authority in rulemakings. Justice Scalia, writing for the majority, stated, quote, "When an agency claims to discover in a long extant statute an unheralded power to regulate a significant portion of the American economy, we typically greet its announcement with a measure of skepticism. We expect Congress to speak clearly if it wishes to assign to an agency decisions of vast economic and political significance." This summer, the Supreme Court cited that passage in King v. Burwell when it electing to base its ruling on its own reading of the statutory language instead of deferring to the IRS's interpretation of an Obamacare provision. The court demonstrated its willingness to narrow its deference to agency interpretations of federal statutes in the future. Also this summer, the Supreme Court ruled in Michigan v. EPA that the EPA acted unreasonably when it wrote its mercury and air toxic standards rule because it failed to consider cost as a factor at the appropriate time. The court painted a target on the reasonableness of the EPA's cost-benefit analyses. Last month, the Sixth Circuit issued a nationwide stay against the Waters of the U.S. rule, just after the U.S. District Court in North Dakota issued a preliminary injunction against the rule in 13 states. Last week, the Fifth Circuit enjoined the president's illegal immigration program. It explained that the administration relied on an obscure provision in the immigration laws that cannot be the basis for authorizing, quote, decisions of vast economic and political significance to an agency. It noted that Congress had refused to enact bills similar to the president's immigration plan. It noted that, quote, the president explicitly stated that it was the failure of Congress to enact such a program that prompted him to change the law. It found that, quote, congressional silence cannot confer on an agency, quote, the power to act. Despite the executive branch's overreach, I am hopeful President Obama will accept one bipartisan environmental priority working its way through Congress: Toxic Substances Control Act reform. After years of struggling to find a pathway, Congress is finally on the verge of passing legislation to reform TSCA. The Senate bill has 57 co-sponsors, including 22 Democrats. The Obama administration's singular focus on carbon emissions makes it easy to overlook other environmental problems, like protecting Americans from exposure to dangerous chemicals. It also makes it easy to overlook ideas such as what Professor Robinson mentioned, going through the code and just cleaning up outdated environmental laws. Thank you to the Federalist Society for having me today and for your attention. I look forward to putting some horsepower into the discussion.